Is this the dagger?
G'day guys, JB here. Right at the end of the month, things are going to start to cook right now in the NBA. We're through February, we're past the All-Star break, and we have 6 genuine weeks of business to see where everyone sits in the pecking order for the 23-24 NBA season. And that's not just from a team perspective, that is also from an individual standpoint. There have been some genuine movers and shakers in the MVP race over the last month. Most of them coming through injuries. Others, well, it just depends how they're playing. It depends whether they're whinging, depends whether they're winning. There's a lot of factors going in. It is a really tight race. I will say now, if this was just based on my 10 total best players on the season so far this year, we have no honourable mentions. And people would be surprised where certain people sat. But that's not how I factor in my MVP race. Therefore, there will be a couple of honourable mentions, and then I can get into the best 10 or the top 10 of the MVP race for the 23-24 NBA season to the end of February. As always, we do look at the qualifiers, and they're really simple. They've always been the same for me. The only thing that has really adjusted is the amount of games, and that's purely because the NBA has instituted their rules. Really easy stuff. You've got to play 65 games. That's the NBA minimum to win the MVP. I would have preferred it was 70. I thought it should have been 70. It's 75. It's 65. We'll run with 65. Really simple stuff there. You have to be leading your team to wins. That's really simple stuff there. You do have to have your team in playoff contention. That's really simple stuff for me as well. That just represents your value, because if you're the best player in games that are winning and your team's winning a lot of games and you're the reason they're winning a lot of games, generally they're going to be the reason that they're in playoff contention. And trade talks. For me, you can't be traded. If a player has been traded, sorry, the value for your most valuable player, to me, I understand there are circumstances post-season where you see a trade, but mid-season, if you are traded, I'm sorry, you're out of that race. That should be an automatic disqualifier. The value there of trading the MVP of the league, unless you are going to absolutely turn around and get 4 All-Stars, and I mean like 3 or 4 All-Stars in that trade, not worth it. So really simple stuff. You need to play the minimum requirement of games. You can't be involved in trade talks. Your team needs to be in contention, and overall, you need to be the leader of your team's wins. The statistics themselves, they then sort themselves out. I don't think anyone could disagree with that. Most players who are the best player on a team that is winning games, generally their numbers in one way, shape or form sort themselves out, whether it's on the offensive end or the defensive end. Without further ado, let's get into the honourable mentions. We'll start with our Golden State Warriors best player, Steph Curry. They are currently 10th in the West. Steph on the season, 27.6 points, 4.3 rebounds, 5 assists, 0.8 steals, 0.4 blocks on 3 turnovers a game. He's shooting 45.5 from the field, 41.1 from deep, and 92.7 from the free throw line. Steph has played 55 games, averaging 33.3 minutes. 31-24 record in his 55 games, and he's been the best player in 22 of those 31 games. Ultimately for Steph, the big thing that hurts him, the Warriors, they're a 10th seed, and they've been fighting from the back all year, and that's really hard to when you're going to assess Steph, because everyone knows the value that Steph brings as a player. Everyone knows that he's one of the best players in the league. Everyone knows he's one of the best players to ever play the game. But there isn't much value in being the best player on the 10th seed. You're not going to walk out with any sort of brass, any contention for any sort of brass from the 10th seed. And I know that there's the play-in tournament. Let's be honest, no one's looking at the play-in tournament if you are a 9th and a 10th seed going, geez, we're going to win a title from here. No one this year can honestly tell me you look at the Lakers, the Warriors, the Hawks and the Bulls and go, yep, they're going to make a run. Hell of a team, they're going to make a run. It's not how this works. Now, if the Warriors overall had 35 wins and Steph was their only player, and I mean your next best player is Jonathan Kuminga and he's only stepped up because you don't have Clay, because you don't have Dre, because you don't have Wiggins, well, a different ball game. Vastly different ball game. We've got that Kobe Bryant 06 conversation happening. That's not the case at the moment. But Steph Curry having a really wonderful year. He would look a lot different on this list if it was just the 10 best players on the season this year. Be the best way that I'll put it. Over to another honourable mention, and this is a guy that's had a lot of disrespect. I personally think he's the best player in Sacramento. I think he's been the second best centre or third best centre this year. He's probably going to get an All-NBA second team nod just the way things are going. And it's well earned. He's been a very underrated player for a long time. Domantas Sabonis of the Sacramento Kings. Sacramento at the end of the month currently sitting 8th in the West. So they are just on the precipice as well. And they're sort of in that mixed with your Dallas, where they're sort of sitting at 7th. You see New Orleans and Phoenix, they're 6th and 5th. New Orleans, sort of Sacramento and Dallas, I think are going to be trying to fight a lot for that 6th seed. I just think that Phoenix will be a better team overall and kick into gear, particularly now that they've been able to work some lineups up. But Sacramento having a nice year, Sabonis having a massive year, and you've only got to look at the numbers. 19.9 points, 13.2 rebounds, and 8.4 assists. He leads the league in double-doubles. He leads the league in triple-doubles. He's had a massive season. 0.9 steals, 0.5 blocks on 3.3 turnovers. And look at the efficiency from the field. 61.6 shooting the basketball all over. 42.2% shooting the basketball from deep. Just under 70% from the line. I do want to see that improve. Most people who follow my channel know that minimum 70% in my eyes for a big man professionally at the free throw line. 58 games, 35.7 minutes, 33 and 25 record, the best player in 17 wins. At the end of the day, I think Sacramento are going to make a really good decision here, no matter what they do with De'Aaron Fox, because I think you're still going to retain your best player. De'Aaron Fox is a hell of a guard. De'Aaron Fox has been one of the 15 best players in the West this year. I wouldn't have if you want to argue he's been a top 15 player in the West this year, yeah, I understand it. I get it. But he's not Domantas Sabonis. It's just really simple. He's not. He's a great three-point shooter. I can appreciate that De'Aaron Fox can shoot the basketball, but he is not the impact player that Sabonis is. Sabonis has been doing this since he was in Indiana. People forget he had an all-star selection in Indiana, particularly in the year that Oladipo went down and his career went backwards. Sabonis has been slept on for quite some time, and it sounds silly, he's living in the heady shadow, the massive shadow, that his father cast in Arvydas, because Arvydas was a beast. Arvydas, one of the best players between 1980 and 2000, that didn't make a huge impact on the NBA, who in the modern game absolutely would make an impact in the NBA. Because the big reason a lot of these guys didn't play back then was not necessarily the professional status, although it was, the money was clearly there. But until 1992, they would not be allowed to play for their national team. And their national pride stood over the fact that they could earn a couple of $1 million a year playing in the United States. So, if Sabonis is playing how his dad would play today. That would probably be the best way to put it. He is playing the way his dad would play today. The question is that you then begin to ask yourself, who's better? And I think that's a really positive conversation for Sabonis to be, considering when he started and he's playing at OKC and he was sort of just running behind Westbrook, and then he got to Indiana, Portland guys, teams like Portland, teams like OKC, slowly building. You could see there was talent. He gets to Indiana, bang, all of a sudden he takes off once again. And he's really proven it again in Sacramento. He's been a massive shining light. He's doing what D-Bots had done before him, what Weber had done before him. Massive, massive run for Sacramento right now. He's having a big season. He's having an impact. And things on this list would look a lot different depending on where Sacramento sat. I think that's a really fair assessment to make. But at number 8, not at number 8, they're 8th in the West. For my last honourable mention, Domantas Sabonis of the Sacramento Kings. And from the honourable mentions, straight over into our top 10. And at number 10, I have Tyrese Halliburton of the Indiana Pacers, who currently sit 7th in the East. They are slowly tracking backwards and forwards. They're going to be a really interesting matchup for the rest of the season out in the East. They're part of a really big jumble there with Miami, with New York, with Philadelphia. They're sort of where they're sitting right now, and Orlando. They're going to be the 4. Philadelphia, I thought, were probably going to be in the top 2. That meniscus tear for Embiid changes things. Now, that's a team that might look interesting in a play-in team, because that's a team that will probably match up too early for their own liking with a really big team. But I think if you're going to talk about teams that are going to probably fall into a play-in tournament and maybe have an impact depending on how people sit, it'd probably be the Philadelphia 76ers. And if you're Indiana, you would not want to be playing the Philadelphia 76ers. But Halliburton having a really nice season, He's missed a few games, but he continues to remain the standard of what used to be a pure point guard in the NBA, as far as a guy who can lead your offense, but primarily is your facilitator. 21.4 points, 3.7 rebounds, 11.6 assists, 1.1 steal, and 0.7 blocks a game. And it's that efficiency that you've really got to look at. He doesn't turn the basketball over. He distributes really well, he scores really efficiently, and he doesn't turn the basketball over. That's a really, really high IQ guy. That's a really good point guard. 48.9 from the field, 39.3 from deep, 84.7 from the free throw line. In the 47 games that he's played, he's averaged 32.1 minutes. 27 and 20 record with him in the team. And in 27 of those wins, he's been the best player in 17 of them. Two things are hurting Tyrese Haliburton right now, and they're things that are certainly going to hurt Indiana. Number one, he is making a real point of not believing in the system that is the 65 games. Now, I understand from a Haliburton standpoint, because Haliburton has been injured previously. Haliburton has needed time off. I can see where the argument comes that someone like him and someone like an Embiid, who are probably still going to, when you're going to look at the impact they have all year, are still going to be, top 10, top 15 players. I can see the argument of where they're disappointed that they can't make the All-NBA first team. And you know what? Maybe it should just be the All-NBA first team, because they can't make All-NBA at all. Maybe it should be the first team. Maybe the first team is the restriction. I understand that. I appreciate that. I think that's a valid argument. But the other side of it for Haliburton as well is the trade piece of Siakam, and the fact that Siakam, in my mind, has been just as good, if not better, in Indiana in the time he's been there than Haliburton has been. I thought that Siakam should have been an all-star player. And it's very hard for me to evaluate a guy who has someone on his team that himself is probably responsible for 13 or 14 wins on the season individually. Of course, I could never have Siakam. You can't get traded and then be jumping onto this list. And if you do end up being traded and you end up on this list, you are right down the bottom of this list. You'd have to be playing out of your absolute backside to be getting any further up. But it's just really hard to gauge a guy who's on the precipice of not making games and who has a very genuine all-star teammate who has outshone them in the period they've been together. In saying that, though, he's had a really, really good season. I've got no qualms with seeing Tyrese Haliburton sitting right there amongst the 10 best players in the league. I've got no issues with him sitting in an All-NBA team. I don't think that you're going to see this guy sit on the All-NBA first team. I think you're going to see him on the All-NBA second team. It's going to be extremely hard to be removing guys like Jokic, like Giannis, like Luka, like Anthony Edwards, like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, like Donovan Mitchell, because they're playing more games and they're having more success. It's going to be really, really tough. You're probably going to see him on a third team with Steph Curry. But he's having a really good season. There's a reason he's sitting at 10th in my MVP race. For the Indiana Pacers, Tyrese Haliburton. Over at number 9, we go to the Phoenix Suns. We head to the 5th seed in the West, and we head over to Kevin Durant. 27.9 points, 6.7 rebounds, 5.7 assists, 0.9 steals, and 1.3 blocks. 3.2 turnovers, and a guy who could continue to push for that 50, 40, 90 season. He's played a lot of games. He's almost played more games now than he did last year. 52.8 from the field, 42.2 from deep, 85.9 from the stripe. He's played 52 games, 37.2 minutes in those games. They're 30 and 22 overall as a record, and he's been the best player in 17 wins. So some of this does come down to seeding. Some of it comes down to appearances. Kevin Durant has been huge. The big thing that does hurt Kevin Durant, though, as to why he's not going to be held as responsible for wins, really simple stuff. He's playing with Devin Booker, and Bradley Beal's had a nice run, as well as Nurkic, who's had a pretty decent impact on the team as well. He's not standing out as much because there is a lot of offense and opportunities going in that team. Nurkic has had a really good month. Been able to pinch hit on some points, been able to hit those rebounds there, been able to facilitate, be part of that new era of big who can do all three keys on the offensive end. You look at Bradley Beal, who's been able to have an impact from the mid-range. You look at Devin Booker, who, to me, you can, as I said, you can still make a case that he is the Suns' most valuable player. He's not their best player, but you can certainly make a case that he is their most valuable player, with the fact that that team is a better team when he is there as a guard than when he is not there. And that's what really hurts Durant's case as well, is that, yeah, Kevin Durant's Kevin Durant. The guy's going to be a top 10 scorer in league history. The guy was on pace to break Kareem's record, let alone LeBron's record. People forget that about Kevin Durant before he was injured in 2015, before he blew his Achilles, all of that sort of stuff. People forget just how good Kevin Durant was. People still sleep on Kevin Durant. I think Kevin Durant's a top 25 player of all time. You plug a guy like that who's able to put up, as you can see, around a 28, 7 and 6, shooting 50% from the field and 42 from deep. He's going to have an impact regardless, but very hard to gauge what kind of impact when he's on a very deep team offensively and he's on a team that's able to draw some attention offensively, much like when he was in Golden State. I don't think there's any doubt that Kevin Durant's best basketball came from 2014 to 2018. There's no doubt about that. People sleep on Durant's MVP season where he was massive, and obviously you've only got to look at the spacing that was created playing for the Warriors. But we're starting to see similar spacing here, and we're seeing a production level. Now, of course, pace is a factor. Of course, the way the game is played is a factor, and I want anyone to really make sure they understand that when you see guys go, oh, geez, look how he's playing for his age, or look at how he's playing for his year. Go and look at the pace that was played at. Look how many more possessions these guys are getting. I don't begrudge them for having that extra pace. That's how the game is. But let's not sit there and go and act as if the statistical comparison's fair. Kevin Durant having a really nice season. I've got him at 9th in my MVP race. He plays in a really stacked team, and they've taken away a few wins from him. It really makes it hard. Over at number 8, and a man that if I was going to do my 10 best players on the season would still be in this list. I have Paolo Banchero of the Orlando Magic, and they're sitting 6th in the East. I got him at 22.8 points. Well, the league has him at 22.8 points. It's not something I judge. 22.8 points, 6.8 rebounds, 5.2 assists, 1 steal, 0.5 blocks on 3 turnovers, 45.9 from the field, 36.2 from deep, 70.1 from the free throw line. He's played 58 games for the Magic. He's averaged 34.8 minutes in those games. They've gone 33 and 25 with him on the floor, or him in the team, and he's been their best player in 18 wins. A lot of people are just sleeping on Banchero. A lot of people are sleeping on Banchero because he's playing in Orlando, and they're a young team, and they're only just above 500. And they've taken a run. They've had a run early because they had a really good back end of this. You know, outside of the first 25 games last year, 35 games last year, Orlando have been a plus 500 team. They have been a playoff team. This is the kind of team that they have. They have young guys who can score and are committed defensively, and that's the key. Now, Banchero's not a standout defensively by any means, but he's also 6'10", and he covers the floor. He provides a lot of length offensively, and he takes up space defensively. That is a crucial cog in the wheel and the machine that is the Magic. And yes, I get the numbers don't pop, 22.8 points. But everyone's scoring 20 points these days. Halliburton, as an example, would not be averaging 20 a game 10 years ago. Would not average 20 a game 10 years ago. That's just how the game is right now. It's so bad that the NBA is considering the Rules Committee again to re-establish defensive presence. It was that much of a joke in the All-Star game that they went, geez, we've got to fix this because this is pathetic. So I understand that, yep, the numbers don't pop. Oh, geez, he's not a 25-point per game scorer. No, but he's doing the one thing that is valuable, and that's impacting, winning, and giving his team a chance to win. And there are guys that have got mind-blowing statistics in this list. There's no doubt about it. They've got guys that are better scorers, better rebounders, better passers, better defenders. And you might argue there are better scorers, better passers, better rebounders, far better defenders in the NBA. I've got no issue with that. But when you look at the impact that a guy's having on a team, is it translating to wins? And that's exactly what's happening for Banchero. He may be the epitome of what my list is about. A guy who impacts wins, who's leading his team to victories, who's keeping them in contention, and you're not being talked about being traded, let alone actually being traded. He's the best player on that young squad. They're a 6th seed. They look like they're going to make their first playoff appearance for a while. Now, it's going to be tough because you're realistically going to run into potentially New York or Milwaukee. That's a tough matchup if you're Orlando. But if you're Orlando and you're going to run into New York and you might catch them slipping, why can't you make the second round? Why can't Banchero be the leader of that team? I outlined it last year after I watched his first game. He's an all-NBA prospect for a decade. I outlined it that he was certainly going to be the rookie of the year. I did outline earlier in the year they needed a leader. Banchero stuck his hand in the air and said, yep, I'm the man. I'm number one on this team. And that's exactly what he's done right now. Number 8, Paolo Banchero, the Orlando Magic in the 6th seed in the East, and he is travelling very, very nicely. Moving over to number 7, I have the leader of the best team in the NBA from the Boston Celtics, number 1 in the East, Jason Tatum. He's averaging 27 points, 8.5 rebounds, 4.9 assists, 1 steal, 0.6 blocks on less than 3 turnovers a game, 2.5 a game, 47.5 from the field, 36.1 from deep, 82.3 from the free throw line. He's played 55 games. He's averaged 35.9 minutes in those games. Boston are 44 and 11. 44 and 11 in those games. And he's been their best player in 20 wins. And much like Tatum, it's the same thing that hurts Durant, Kevin Durant at number 9 for the Phoenix Suns. The thing that hurts Jason Tatum is that he's a good player. He's a very, very good player. He's a really good player. He's a guy that, if you were going to base it for me last year, I can make a case last year that if you're going to base it on games played, on results driven as far as wins, then I've got no issue with saying Jason Tatum was the most valuable player in the NBA last year. Cast that final stuff aside, cast the playoff stuff aside. In the regular season last year, I have no issues in making a case that Jason Tatum was the MVP of the league. On the league's own qualifiers that they have now, Jason Tatum was the MVP of the NBA. Except he played 70 games. Obviously the qualifiers 65, but he played 70 games. He led his team to wins. Was in playoff contention. Wasn't talked about being traded. And he's in the same boat again this year. He's the best player on a team that's in playoff contention. He's leading them to wins. Ain't nobody talking about trading Jason Tatum at all. This guy's having another big season, but the thing that hurts the most is the same thing that's hurting other players. He's playing on a really good team where he's got some really good teammates who are really contributing to wins. I don't think anyone's going to deny the fact that Jaylen Brown has had a nice season and that he's contributed to wins. At one point I had Jaylen Brown in my top 10. He had a really good run there in December. I think no one's going to doubt the fact that Porzingis has been huge for that team. In fact, he's been the cog in that team that has really sped the machine up. I don't think anyone's doubting the fact that Derek White, one of the best rotation players, just a guy who's playing he's playing his role, and his role is to just be an absolute standout like he is as a 4th and 5th option. But I don't think anyone can deny the depth that Boston are presenting. Now, the next question is, can Boston get over the hump? Because at the moment, it's a matter of who's facing them in the conference finals. Now, the other thing that's also hurting Jason Tatum, it's the same issue that I had with Joel Embiid last year. Dude, we know you're a good player. You know you can play. But you don't need to tell us that you're the MVP or you have deserved an MVP and give me the MVP trophy. That's not how this works. This is not how it's ever worked. It's the same thing I said about Embiid last season. Don't be the standard, or don't get to the standard, be the standard. Embiid wanted to get an MVP. Okay, that's great, but you weren't the standard for best player in the league. So you've got to stand out. And I'll give Embiid credit here. He was tracking okay. I don't think he would have been the MVP this year in my opinion. But there'd be more to it this year. Upped his scoring again. 3rd straight scoring title. Now, I'm not saying that a back-to-back scoring champ shouldn't be an MVP, but when you're clearly not the best center and the one that's having the most impact for a team, that's when it's a little different. I was happy to say that Joel Embiid was the best big in the NBA this year. No qualms on that whatsoever. Upped his defensive game, upped his team involvement, really bought in on the system, and you're like, damn, this dude he's on a tear. Tatum's not doing that this year. Embiid wasn't doing it last year. He was this year. He wasn't doing it last year. Tatum's not doing it this year. There's nothing that screams to me Jason Tatum's the MVP of the NBA. There's nothing that screams to me that Jason Tatum's All-NBA first team. I think he's All-NBA. He's not All-NBA first team. You've got to set the standard. You've got to be the standard. Now, Jason Tatum, great leader for that team. And they've got some nice supporting parts around them as well. You would have to suggest that Boston and Denver is the NBA Finals matchup that we're probably going to receive. Don't think anyone's denying that at all. But you still have to factor in that other guys are having an impact. And 20 wins is remarkable. I mean, he's one of what? When I'm going to look at guys, one of 9 guys with 20 wins this season. He's still a top 10 player for guys that I have with 20 wins. But don't sit there and say that you are the MVP when you haven't set the standard. I'm not holding those finals and those playoffs against you. But you've got to be the standard. Don't talk about the standard. But at number 7, Jason Tatum, the Boston Celtics. They're the number 1 team in the East. They're a deep team. Tatum's been their leader. It's very hard to deny the impact of the other main 3 guys. And Drew Holiday has had on that team. Over to number 6. And this is where we talk about standing out. I got Donovan Mitchell of the Cleveland Cavaliers. And they are the 2nd seed in the East. Donovan Mitchell this year, just continuing to move up the charts. Just continuing to play good basketball. 28 points, 5.4 rebounds, 6.2 assists, 1.8 steals, 0.5 blocks, less than 3 turnovers at 2.9. Shot 47.2 from the field, 37.1 from deep, 86.1 from the free throw line. And here's where it starts to get tricky because he's played 47 games and he can't afford to miss match time. 35.7 minutes per game, 32 and 15 in those 47 games. And in those 32 wins, he's been the best player in 22 of them. The thing for Cleveland right now is they need to steady with their lineup. Max Strus been hitting bombs, pinch hitting really nicely. Jarrett Allen still having an impact. A really nice piece at centre. And then you have Mobley and Garland coming back in to really solidify the defensive side of things and produce a lot more pressure offensively out the perimeter. Honestly, the only qualm that Donovan Mitchell has in his argument right now is that he's played 47 games and that he needs to be pretty much perfectly healthy for the rest of the season to remain in contention. But if you're going to go and look at the impact that Mitchell's had on this Cleveland team after everyone wrote him off, he continues to lead them with a really strong squad. Very hard for me to sit here and go, oh, geez, I can't have Donovan Mitchell here, or I can't have this here or there. Donovan Mitchell, again, the epitome of MVP when you're really looking at it. Leading his team to wins, genuine playoff contender, not being talked about. The only caveat is that he needs to keep playing those games. Outside of that, I want to hear an argument against Donovan Mitchell not being a top 10 player in the NBA. I want to hear the argument. Because if Donovan Mitchell was in Los Angeles or Boston or New York, his conversation's a lot stronger than all but maybe 2 players in the NBA. Purely from the media side of things. If you put him in New York, you put him in Boston, you put him in Chicago, you put him in New York, you put him in Los Angeles. And we're talking about a guy who's getting treatment as the MVP of the league and the guy. Now, of course, the tough part about it is the absolute generational comparisons that are being done right now. It's hard to compete against what Jokic is doing. It's hard to compete against the freak that is Giannis. Statistically, you're not going to compete on the perimeter with Luka Doncic. But because he's playing in a minute market, don't a small market, a minute market, and your predecessor is LeBron James, this man is getting no attention. Go and look at the amount of wins that Cleveland strung together without Mobley and without Garland and tell me who the leader of those teams were. There's a reason Cleveland are sitting second. What sort of impact they have in the playoffs this year will be seen. And there's a chance they're going to have to play a 7th seed. Who is that 7th seed? It could be Philadelphia. My goodness, good luck. Because you're going to have Embiid back probably for a good 4 weeks warming up into the postseason. Who has his own playoff problems. We understand that. Philadelphia become a bit of a different team. But ultimately for Cleveland right now, it's very hard to deny the fact that what they're doing and how they're doing it is all down to the fact that they are led by this man. And he has had a tremendous season. There's a reason I've got him at number 6. The only question is he going to get the games under his belt? Because for me, you would still see Donovan Mitchell sitting in the All-NBA second team. But he's a top 10 player this year. He's 6th in my MVP race. He's had a phenomenal season for the Cleveland Cavaliers. Moving into the top 5, and at number 5, I have the best player for the best team in the Western Conference to the end of the month. I have Anthony Edwards of the Minnesota Timberwolves. 26.6 points, 5.3 rebounds, 5.2 assists, 1.3 steals and 0.5 blocks, 3.2 turnovers. Probably just turning it over a little bit too much. It may be the ultimate downfall of Minnesota this season. We'll see what happens in the future. 46.9 from the field, 38.1 from deep, and 84 from the free throw line. There's no doubt about it. Anthony Edwards has absolutely solidified his floor game there. Can absolutely fly, an absolute athlete, can really attack the rim, but really solidified his floor game there, and not allowing him to not allowing it to just be an absolute athletic contest. He's played 56 games, 35.1 minutes in those games, 40-16 for the Minnesota Timberwolves, and he's been their best player in 22 wins. And here's a guy who has probably suffered in the win department, and it's another reason, again, when I look at a Jason Tatum and I look at the impact that the team's had, it's another thing that I've got with Anthony Edwards. He's just led them to slightly more wins than Tatum. That's really where it doubles down to. Because Karl Anthony Towns' second option been really good this year. I don't think he was an all-star when he got selected, but I think he was in contention. And then you've got arguably the Defensive Player of the Year in Rudy Gobert, and you've got arguably the Sixth Man of the Year in Naz Reid. The only difference is that Edwards has led more wins. And I don't hear there being a massive outcry that Anthony Edwards should be the MVP. It's called perspective. It's called understanding and knowing the role. And it's clear that Anthony Edwards is the number one option. Anthony Edwards established himself last year, for me, as a top 10 player in the NBA. And he's done it again this season. Except this year, he's probably gone, hey, I want to be in that top 5 conversation. I want to be on Team USA again. I'm the reason that Team USA really bumped up some interest last year. Get me back on the Olympic squad. Having a huge run right now. But the key is that he's on a pretty good team, and they're winning games, and he's having an impact on those wins. But you do have to factor in the fact that he does have a nice team around him. Not a shot at Anthony Edwards. As I said, I've got him as their best player in 22 wins. He's going to play 65 games, albeit without an injury. He's leading them to wins. They're in playoff contention. They're not talking about trading him. People are talking about trading into Minnesota. 12 months ago, they were talking about trading everything out of Minnesota. He's been the huge reason for this turnaround. And if you're going to look at the impact, yeah, you know, as far as what that's done for the team, it's not measurable statistically. You can make a case for most improved player this year. I wouldn't do it, but I can understand the case. Just a huge year for Anthony Edwards. Again, a guy who's not settled on just being on the floor. He's not settled to just trying to fly through the air and just being an absolute athletic freak and attacking the rim. He's clearly shown a development and a leadership quality. And that's a big reason that he currently sits in this top 5. Again, back to the Boston argument. Well, he's on a really good team. And there's another couple of guys that are going to get the good team treatment here. Don't worry about that. But he's been their best player. At no point is he sitting there screaming about being the MVP. He understands the impact that Karl Anthony Towns is having as a second option. He would have to understand the impact that Rudy Gobert is having defensively. And he appreciates the impact someone like Naz Reid has leading the second unit. They're just getting on with the business. He just happens to be a really good player amongst getting on with the business. Sometimes it's really simple. A lot of people look for the complications and the X, Y, Z and, oh, well, this is better than this. So sometimes it's simple. It's really simple. For me, that's where Anthony Edwards sits with it right now. It's really simple. I think he's been one of the 5 best players in the NBA in the MVP conversation this year. He's led them to 22 wins. They're the number 1 seed in the West. It's having an impact. Really simple stuff. Starting at number 5, Anthony Edwards of the Minnesota Timberwolves, number 1 seed in the West. And a guy who is tracking for yet another All-NBA contention, is in contention for All-NBA this season and should be in contention for the Olympics as well.
From number 5 to number 4. Oh boy, the numbers on this one are a bit ridiculous. At number 4, I got Luka Doncic of the Dallas Mavericks, and they sit 7th in the West. Luka has just been on an absolute tear. I don't think there's anything or any other way to describe it. 34.4 points, 8.8 rebounds, 9.7 assists. Around a 34, 9 and 10. 1.5 steals, 0.6 blocks, 3.9 turnovers. He's got that high usage, but it's that efficient floor scoring that's really starting to have an impact. 49.4 from the field, 38.0 from deep, and 78.2 from the free throw line. Just a massive, massive, massive run from the floor and on the perimeter there for Luka Doncic. 51 games played, 37.4 minutes. They're 31 and 20, but he's been the best player in 24 wins. If there's one thing that Luka knows how to do, he knows how to put numbers up. Those numbers are translating to wins a little bit more, and those wins are certainly more than a lot of players in this league. Now, it's going to shock a lot of people, but the 5 best basketballers on the planet right now aren't from the United States. You've got one from Slovenia, you've got one from Greece, you've got one from Serbia, you've got one from Canada. Just, yeah. Your best players in the world aren't from the United States anymore. Luka's a prime example of that. An absolute prime example of that. And people don't really understand it because they can't believe it. And of course, Cameroon for Joel Embiid. That's just how the game is right now. It's a global game. And one of the best exponents of the global game right now is Luka Doncic. Of course, the harsh criticism, the harsh reality of it, though, is that he's fighting for a play-in tournament spot. He's in that same boat as Sabonis from a play-in standpoint. LeBron and Anthony Davis for a play-in spot. Steph Curry for a play-in spot. And that's really what's causing a lot of angst there. And a lot of it comes down to the defensive side of the ball. And it's one thing Dallas wanted to fortify, and I think they're going to be okay with. Daniel Gafford is a huge get for them defensively. And I think it'll be interesting to see what sort of work Dallas put in over the last 6 weeks of the season. Because that'll be the ultimate test of where things are for the Mavericks. Because if they're going to sit in that play-in tournament, it's going to be a really, really interesting run. How does this team look as a 7th seed in the playoffs going against Minnesota, going against OKC, going against Denver or the Clippers? Where do you sit that team? Because if you're Dallas, you're not wanting to run into that immediately, but you're also factoring in that, hey, we've got to stay alive here. You know, Dallas are clearly ahead of the Lakers. And I think the Kings are clearly ahead of the Lakers. I don't know how much difference there's going to be, but you would not want to be Dallas, and certainly wouldn't want to be Luka and go, man, I had a 35, 9 and 10 season and I made the first round. This is the issue that Luka had last year. Everyone was going on about Luka being the MVP, and it's not going to matter. He's better than Giannis. Oh, he's better than Jokic. Oh, he's better than Tatum. He's having a far better year. End of the day, you ain't playing playoff basketball. It doesn't mean diddly. Doesn't mean a thing. And I think that's the point now that Dallas, or certainly Luka, is at. It's great to put up these numbers. And yeah, they're starting to win a couple of games in the regular season. But you need to win a few more. We're talking about a guy who, you know, he's putting up numbers, Oscar Robertson, Michael Jordan stat lines. That's ridiculous. You could argue no 2 guards in the history of the game have stuffed the stat sheet more than those 2 guys. But it has to translate to a win at some point. The defensive side of the ball, I think, is a big key for that. I think sometimes the off nights efficiently are a big key for that. But right now, you're starting to see Dallas do a little bit of building, starting to see Dallas do a bit of moving and shaking. And honestly, if Luka Doncic is going to go 36, 10 and 10, like he has for the last 16 games, and they keep winning. They were at a 9 and they're 10 and 16, 10 and 6 over those 16 games. You know, not a bad percentage. It's going to keep things moving, but it needs to keep translating to wins. And it's extremely impressive for a guy in the 7th seed to be in the top 5 in the MVP race. Don't get me wrong about that, but it has to translate to wins. It has to translate to victories. But Luka, number 4 in my MVP race for 23-24 to the end of February. Just mind-boggling. 34, 9 and 10 on a season. Mind-boggling. But what will it translate to is the next question. Over to number 3 on the podium. Still on the podium. Just probably the most consistent player of the last 10 years. You could really argue it, and that's Giannis Antetokounmpo. The Bucks are the 3rd in the East. He's averaging 30.6 points, 11.2 rebounds, 6.3 assists. He's back on that all-world defensive presence as well. 1.3 steals and 1 block a game. 3.4 turnovers. It's the efficiency beyond the 2-pointers that do concern me on this, and it's the chemistry that does concern me on this for Giannis. And just seeing how he is going to be able to mesh with the rest of the team going forward. 61.7 from the field is ridiculous. I don't think anyone's going to deny that. I mean, when you look at every player I've talked about in my top 10 list, he clearly stands above in the field goal department. When you look at everyone that I've spoken about down to my honourable mentions, he's only just ahead of Sabonis, who's at 61.6. But he stands out like a sore thumb for his production from the field in that sense. 29% from deep and 65.8 from the free throw line. I'm never going to be happy with that. I don't know anyone that's going to be happy with the fact that the guy who takes that many threes only makes 29% of them, or a guy that gets to the line at his size isn't 7 out of 10. But the Bucks are winning games. They're not quite at the pace, but they're winning games. 58 played for Giannis, 34.9 minutes in those games. They're 38 and 20. And he's been the best player in 27 wins. He's one of the 5 best players in the NBA. He's one of the 3 best players in my MVP race. He's been very good offensively. He's been very good defensively. But the key here now is building this team up and getting them back on track. Because there's only so long that a guy that as nice as Giannis is and as gentle as Giannis is, that he can avoid any form of criticism. Whether that's in the way of the coaching merry-go-round that has been the Bucks, who have had just as many coaches as the Nets over the last 2 seasons, might I add. Whether it's that level of merry-go-round, whether it's looking there and seeing that, okay, Damian Lillard's now all of a sudden not happy to be with Milwaukee. Well, what kind of connection do you have with him off the court? What kind of connection does he have with the team off the court? How is that affecting guys like Lopez, like Portis, like Middleton? You know, there's a lot of things that have to come into play here. And I know I'm getting nitpicky, but if we're going to really try and pick things up at your MVP level and teams succeeding and whatnot, this is where it all comes down to. Don't get me wrong, Giannis has proven he can get it done. They were the number 1 seed last year. They were a champion 2 years prior to that. So there's no question that they can get it done. There's no doubt that this is a team that has those kind of players. They've got an even bigger shot maker now in Lillard. Won the All-Star MVP, won the 3-point contest. So you've got a guy who doesn't mind. I know it's very hard to really try and ascertain where that sits, considering the state of the All-Star game and the 3-point contest. But you're looking at resume guys there. You've got a core from a championship team. The loyal guys from the core of that championship team. And you've got one of the biggest clutch shooters that the league's seen for the last decade, or certainly for the length of his career. And he's coming out saying that he gets bored and lonely. I understand the family and the friends side of it, but what are we doing as a team here? Why aren't we embracing this guy? And some of it has to come down to Giannis. It really does. Giannis, probably my favourite player in the NBA. But there's so much, only so long you can go before you've got to be real about that sort of stuff. Don't get me wrong, play on the floor on both ends has been great. But it's the little things that are going to get the team over the hump that are just going to add that little bit to you and your case. As I said, best player in 27 wins. I've got no doubt that he's a top 3 player in the NBA this year. He's one of the 5 best players on the planet. But there's just the little things. The Bucks sitting at 3rd with the list they have in comparison to other teams doesn't make sense. They need to be at minimum a 2 seed. But Giannis having a really nice year. It's going to be interesting to see what sort of leadership qualities and stepping up and stepping out in the main game really come forward in this last 6 weeks. At number 3, Giannis Antetokounmpo of the Milwaukee Bucks. And it hasn't really changed all year. It certainly hasn't changed the last couple of months. Number 2, Nikola Jokic of the Denver Nuggets. 3rd in the West is Denver. And this, again, what do you say? He's just the best center in the NBA. You can make a very good case he's been the best player in the NBA for a decade. Or he's been the best, you could say he's had the best 10-year run. 25.8 points, 12.3 rebounds, 9.3 assists, 1.2 steals, 0.9 blocks, less than 3 turnovers with that high volume usage, 58% from the field, 34.5 from deep, and that fluctuates more than people realise. 81.9 from the free throw line. 58 games played, 33.9 minutes. They're 40 and 18 in that time, and he's their best player in 30 wins. The only thing that hurts Nikola Jokic is that he's not number 1 on this list. Because Denver is showing, yep, we're going to be a tough team to beat. If we've got everyone firing at the right time, we've got the experience. We can do it. Because there is such a ridiculous outlier on this team, historically. To give you some sort of idea, and it's something I've thrown about, and I will correct myself on my video now. I'll correct myself on my video when I do my wrap for the last fortnight. I thought it was the 50 over 20 rule. 50 wins before 20 losses. It's not. It's 40 wins before 20 losses. Well, Denver have done that. Minnesota have done that. Boston have done that. The only other team that has also done it's the Clippers. There's one more that I'll mention very briefly. You're probably going to get a gist of who's sitting at number 1. That hasn't changed all year. But of all those teams to have won a championship since 2000 that were 40 wins before 20 losses, only 3 of them were not a top 10 defensive team. Only 3 of them. Can you guess who those 3 teams were that were not a top 10 defensive rated team in the year they won the ring while being 40 before 20? There's only 3 of them. One of them was the 01 Lakers, who were 21st in defensive rating. The Golden State Warriors were not in that ballpark. I believe it was 2018. You had Kevin Durant and Steph. And the other one was the 23 Nuggets. Because they have one of the biggest outliers offensively from a center position that we've ever seen. That speaks volumes of the impact the guy does have. And he's still having, might I add. Here's a guy that's just casually rocking up with low, mid, triple doubles. But he's clearly the reason they're winning games. Michael Porter Jr. had his best game of the season to end the month of February. No surprise, Jokic taking a back step, finding him some really good looks. The vision's insane, the creativity's insane, the efficiency from an offensive standpoint's insane. And while I still don't think that he's a good defender, there's no doubt about it that he has worked his way into that system defensively very, very nicely. I don't know anyone that can watch a Denver game and not think that he hasn't worked his way into their system very, very nicely. The ultimate issue with Jokic right now is that he's not number 1 on this list. I don't think he's the MVP this year. I think there's been a clear standout guy for MVP this year. But again, this next guy is certainly going to... The reasons are really evident as to why no one talks about it. Really evident. But if Nikola Jokic wins a 3rd MVP this year, I'm not going to be shocked. And it's at that point that you ask the question, well, why doesn't he have 4 in a row? Things that people just really need to consider a look at. But number 2, Nikola Jokic, the Denver Nuggets, they're 3rd in the West. They're a team that is genuinely tracking towards a back-to-back championship run. They've got a couple of opponents here in the West, and they've certainly got a big beast in the East. but they are tracking very, very nicely indeed. Jokic is tracking very, very nicely indeed. But over to number one, numero uno. He hasn't really fallen off the perch all year, and he just continues to dominate. From the Oklahoma City Thunder, the second best team in the West, I've got Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. 31.2 points, 5.6 rebounds, 6.5 assists, 2.1 steals, 0.9 blocks, and 2.1 turnovers. He's shooting 54.8 from the field, 39.2 from deep, and 88.2 from the free throw line. He is just as much a chance to go 50-40-90 as Kevin Durant. He's played 58 games, 34.5 minutes. They're 41-17, and he's been their best player in 38 of those 41 wins. I don't think it's close as to who the MVP should be this year. But it's the same treatment that everyone else is going to say. Well, he's playing with a Rookie of the Year candidate in Chet. Yeah, he is. And Chet has not had anywhere near the same impact that Shai has had on this team. Oh, geez, but they're just a really good young squad. Yeah, they are. And look who the best player in their wins has been. Oh, geez, he's got some really good defensive pieces around him. And, geez, that young point guard in Giddey, he's had that as a distraction too. But, geez, it just shows what kind of a team they are. There's a reason they're the kind of team they are. And that's because Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is the best player on the team. Minimum number amount of threes, he's averaging over 30 a game. When he does take them, he makes them. He gets to the line, he converts at the line. What else has this guy got to do? We're talking about an All-NBA first-team selection, an all-defensive first-team selection level of player who could have a 50-40-90 season, who could lead a team to the number one record in the West, all with the distraction of Josh Giddey, all with the distraction of Chet versus Wemby, whilst doing it on both ends of the floor, as good as anybody. If you can give me a reason Shai Gilgeous-Alexander should not be the MVP, then I want to hear it, and I want to laugh at it, and I want to screw it up, and I want to throw it in a trash bin, and I want to burn it. Because it's nothing but an excuse. He ticks every box that anybody wants. And I get he hasn't had playoff experience. That's great. That's awesome. But I don't recall them going, oh, geez, he had a bad second round, so, geez, that affects the fact that he dominated November and December, which is when this award is judged. Give me a reason Shai Gilgeous-Alexander isn't the MVP of the league. Go and look at all those OKC games and tell me that Shai Gilgeous-Alexander was not the best player in those wins. Because it would be awfully egregious to suggest that he's not. You want a guy that can scores. Well, Shai's averaging 30. Well, he needs to do it efficiently. Well, he's doing that. He needs to make his threes, and he does. But does he convert at the line? He does. Yeah, but other impacts too. Geez, he's got to be able to, get on the boards, and he's got to be able to pass. Ticking those boxes. What's he like defensively? Really, really damn good. Geez, does he keep possession of the ball? Yes. The lowest turnover rate of anybody on this list by a street. Even Tyrese Halliburton turns the ball over more than Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander does a lot more on both ends of the floor with greater efficiency. He scores, he facilitates, he gets on the glass, he plays all-world defense, he doesn't turn the ball over, he scores efficiently, they win games, they're in playoff contention, he's not talked about being traded, he's going to make the game's requirement. What else does the man have to do? Yes, he's playing on a nice team, but he's clearly standing out on that team. That, this sort of stuff works. He doesn't need to campaign to be the MVP of the league. He doesn't need to campaign to be the best player on his team. He doesn't need to go and say, oh, well, look what I did in the off-season, look at my work. He just gets it done. And he's the absolute prime example of not being in a big market. If Shai Gilgeous-Alexander did this in Los Angeles, in New York, or in Boston, there's no conversation about anyone else in the NBA. No conversation. Shea's been threatening to do this for years. Anyone who's followed the league, and I mean the league, not just teams, or ESPN or Fox or anyone like that, knew this was going to happen. At some point it was going to happen. And now all of a sudden they're healthy and they know they've got draft stocks, so they're just going to be able to keep balling and balling and balling because Sam Presti's an absolute genius. Sky's the limit. An absolute limit. MVP of the league by a street. Number 1, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander of the Oklahoma City Thunder. That's my MVP wrap to the end of February. That's me, guys. I'm out.